Released by Konami in 1987, Castlevania II: Simon's Quest for the NES has both been widely revered and hated in the gaming community. Simon's Quest was released in Japan as Dracula II: The Accursed Seal for the Famicom Disk System. The Famicom Disk System was a format that never made it to the US. It was an attachment to the Japanese Nintendo that allowed players to save their progress onto the floppy disk itself. Many games that were released as password games or battery backup games on the American NES were originally released in Japan as disc games. Because of the limited size allowed on the disc, many of these games were plagued by a lower quality of music and long load times between levels. Well, let's get back to the gigantic gray cartridge version. If you look at the Castlevania timeline, Simon's Quest is the second game in what can be considered the Simon Belmont trilogy. Even though Simon Belmont is arguably the most famous hero in the entire franchise, he really only appeared in 3 Castlevania games. The original Castlevania featured Simon hunting down the evil Count in his own castle, ultimately defeating him. In the American version of Super Castlevania IV for the Super Nintendo, the game's opening story and instruction manual clarifies that this entry into the Castlevania series is actually a direct sequel to Simon's Quest. However, in Japan, Super Castlevania IV is simply considered to be a remake of the original. Either way, it follows the basic structure of the first game, everything from the castle being the centerpiece, to the hunt for the Prince of Darkness, to the straightforward and linear gameplay. But then there's the middle game of the trilogy, Castlevania II. This game is something special. In my opinion, it was the Empire Strikes Back of this trilogy. The story was a bit darker, it was told in a different style, and it had an isolated, paranoid, and tragic atmosphere. The story takes place after the events of the first Castlevania. Once Dracula was defeated, his followers spread his remains throughout the cursed mansions across the Transylvania countryside. Just a few years after the defeat of Dracula, Simon Belmont falls ill to the final curse Dracula placed upon him, just as the evil Count was facing his death. In this game, Simon is essentially dying, and the only way for our hero to lift the curse placed upon him is by collecting the scattered body parts of Dracula, taking them to the ruins of Castlevania, and reviving the dead vampire for one last battle. I don't know about you, but this story is epic. To tell this story, Konami gave us a completely different approach to gameplay. When Simon's Quest begins, the screen pans and we're in the middle of a town. All you have is a short whip, a life bar, and a Zelda-like submenu. This is nothing like the original Castlevania. Fans that were expecting a return to the linear, forward-based platforming style were completely taken aback. People had the same reaction when Zelda 2 was released and we were thrown into a completely different style of gameplay. As soon as you press start, the game begins and you are completely lost. You have to figure out all of this on your own. There is no time limit in the game, but there is a clock telling you how long you've spent on the quest. And by the way, this game is aptly named. This is definitely a quest, not only for Simon, but also for the person playing the game. This is a Castlevania role-playing game, something we wouldn't see again for 10 years when Symphony of the Night was released for the original PlayStation. It even had a basic leveling up system that allowed your power meter to increase and allowed Simon to take more hits. In 1988, when I first picked this up, along with an instance of frustration and confusion, my first reaction was, "This is so damn cool. I'm playing a Castlevania game, but I have complete control on where I'm going, and I'm completely freaked out." Gameplay involves fighting the bad guys, collecting hearts, which in this game are actually valued as currency and not additions to your secondary weapon. In fact, many of the items you receive improve upon the weapons you have. Unlike the previous Castlevania, and many going forward, you are able to improve upon your whip. From the Thorn Whip, to the Morning Star, to the Flame Whip. You must find the clues given to you by the townspeople, as well as those left in the books found in the 5 mansions. All of this is in an effort to find the tricks to locating all of Dracula's hidden body parts. Keeping a map of where you are going is essential. Luckily, there's a password system. I still remember the password I obtained right before the final battle. I can't prove it to you that I know it by heart through this video, but I'll say it very quickly and maybe you'll believe me. 7Y2NQVFTT11ZXYB5. I've had that code carved into my brain for 20 years, and hopefully I've bequeathed it upon all of you. I will consider this review a success if anyone out there actually uses this code to beat the game. Sadly, however, it will only lead you to one of the 2 bad endings. Yes, that's right. Castlevania II has 3 different endings. The first time I beat this game, I had no idea that video games could have different endings. Granted, I'm not saying there weren't any out there, but it was so cool that this was happening in a Castlevania game. The clock in your sub-menu that I mentioned before provides the indication of how long it has taken for you to complete your quest, giving you one of 3 different endings. All the endings take place at the grave of Dracula. The one good ending shows victory while giving a glimpse to Dracula's imminent return. Of the 2 bad endings, the one in color tells how Simon has died after the battle, and the other gray-colored ending is just plain boring. Granted, anyone who knows Simon's Quest will point to all the gameplay faults and frustrations. For example, you still can't jump from the stairs, something you couldn't do until the release of Dracula X for the PC Engine. Plus, when you're in the mansions, there are pitfalls where you just start falling through the floor. On top of that, there are only a couple large bosses in the game, and Dracula himself is really simple to defeat. This contributes to the game's ease of difficulty. Simon's Quest is really not a hard game. It's mostly tedious. The smaller technical faults become larger annoyances once you have to deal with them all of the time. Throughout the game, day turns into night, adding a brand new theme to the series. During night, the towns are no longer safe, as ghouls walk around at will and all enemies in the game become stronger. The actual day-night messages on screen take some time to load, but they do add a moment to prepare for the more difficult baddies about to come your way. Though many things could have been improved upon to make this game even better, nothing is taken away from the greatest aspect of this game, the atmosphere. The music is some of the best in this series, and many of these tracks are reprised in later sequels. Simon's Quest places you in a state of confusion and discovery. In 1986, the original Zelda threw players headfirst into a wide-open environment with little explanation on which way the player needs to go. A year later, Simon's Quest did the same thing, except unlike Zelda, this open-ended concept was done with a side-scroller. This was essentially a prototype of all future Castlevania games. It was a concept well ahead of its time. Simon's Quest was definitely an unexpected sequel to the original Castlevania. It was a game that rewarded perseverance, exploration, patience, and resourcefulness. While the game had its many faults, it has to be admired for its influence in the future of platformers. In the age of 3D games, almost all remaining platformers released have elements that can find their origins within Castlevania 2. Some of the greatest Castlevania games that still come out today owe much of their concepts to this original attempt at the open-ended, side-scrolling adventure game. Like any good genre, many elements have been improved upon over time, but Simon's Quest will always remain one of the favorites of the NES library. And after all these years, I still have to say, this game is most fun when played at night.